One of the areas that I saw real changes in, and that I was actually very pleased with the direction that we went, concerned the honours program. In the honours program, we give our students an opportunity to undertake research. And almost all departments offer an honours program, but we relatively early on decided we were going to raise the bar, that an honours program, an honours project for our students couldn't just be some interesting topic where they carried out some interviews or did just a little bit of research on, but we were really going to require them to meet the standards of published research in the quality of the questions they asked and the methodology that they used. And this was not accomplished without pain, without tears, as we kept raising the bar on our students. But the students are smart and hardworking. And we were very proud of the fact that a significant number of our students over the years, probably as much as 30% of the students, publish their honours research in high quality science journals, science and social science journals. So we were very proud of the training we were giving them in research. And as a researcher and someone who was very passionate about her research, working with undergraduates and being able to communicate my enthusiasm to them and to teach them how to undertake high quality research has been very rewarding. So I very much enjoyed that aspect of the program. Well, there's always been a rich overseas program at Stanford University. There's always been Stanford in Florence and Stanford in England, and then they developed Stanford in Japan and in Chile, and you know, the list of countries change. And a challenge for us is, because we're unit heavy, how we can allow our students to go overseas. But we did something else because we saw anthropology as being vital to the behavioural sciences, a component of human biology, and because we offered a lot of courses about the third world, whether it was third world health or international health, or we were looking at the environment and looking at it in different countries, our students have had a healthy interest in that. And they've also often wanted to undertake research, and then we channeled them through the honours program. Because we set the bar high, because they had to have worked out in advance their whole procedure for research, what exactly was the research question, how they were going to measure it, who their sample would be, they didn't go and get lost in Tibet or in the Himalayas or in Peru or elsewhere. They went with a particular purpose in mind, and therefore I think they were really able to benefit from their experiences abroad, because they were going there with specific questions to address and to think about, and they came back and they inspired all of us with their energy, with their enthusiasm and with their findings. So it's largely been through well-supervised research projects that our students have gone overseas, if they didn't go with the actual overseas program. Now, many universities have students who go overseas. It was just that our degree of supervision and the work they had to do prior to going overseas and prior to collecting data, that I think made it a much more focused experience for these students. So I've had some students do amazing work in overseas countries. I had one student undertake an honours project where she was looking at orphanages in Tibet. Now, she looked at two samples. There is the Tibetans in Tibet, and Tibet is under Chinese rule, and as you know, that's an issue of considerable political sensitivity. But there are orphanages in Tibet. And then she had a group of Tibetan children in India, where many Tibetans fled when the Chinese really took over Tibet. And there is a very large Tibetan community, and they have established orphanages as well. She went both to Tibet and to this particular location in India, and she assessed the children. She gave them drawing activities to do and looked at the themes they developed. She spoke to their caregivers and looked at what their goals were. She looked at their cognitive advancement in the two different groups. So these were all ethnic Tibetans. They were in two very different political systems. There were some similarities in the structure of their orphanages and with quite different outcomes in the children. I thought that was an amazing piece of research for an undergraduate. She spent 2 summers collecting the data and gave very insightful interpretations of what she found. To the best of my knowledge, it was one of the first times that Tibetan children in Tibet had been compared to Tibetan children in India in a Tibetan community. So I thought that was a particularly interesting project. So that's another one that sort of comes to mind. I had another student who went to Greece to look at children in orphanages, and this was in the early 1970s. At the time, I had carried on research on the Israeli kibbutz, where children are raised collectively, not by their parents, but by professional caregivers. And in contrast to children raised in orphanages in this country or in England, the children on kibbutz came out with looking very good, both in terms of cognitive, social and moral development. So this undergraduate, building on that work, went to an orphanage in Greece and looked at the orphans. She studied the orphans, she studied the caregivers, and she studied the outcomes on the children. And even though when she came back she was only a junior, she went to professional conferences and presented the paper with professors around. She published the paper, we published jointly, it was very well received. So that was another very focused research experience that's actually very difficult to carry off because many countries don't want you in their orphanages. They certainly don't want Westerners and Americans in particular putting down their best efforts to provide for these children, and very often the result of orphanages is such that we say there are bad outcomes for children. But they allowed her in. She did just a fine piece of work. So we have many others. There was one student who went to Moscow, and she was also interested in street children, and she wanted to know what access to medical facilities they had. So she went and she studied children who lived under bridges and who lived in doorways, and I thought that was quite an amazing piece of work. So our students have been quite fearless in what they take on. Many faculties would quake in their shoes at the thought of trying to get official permission from Chinese and Tibetan authorities to undertake comparisons, but these students charge right in. They're young and they're fresh and they're delightful young people with good skills, so the authorities are not so alarmed when they come in and they say they want to do a project. But it really has been a wonderful experience for me, a mind-enlarging experience to see that if you don't imagine at the beginning all the obstacles that you encounter, how much you can actually get done. They did things that if you'd asked me beforehand, I'd say, oh, well, they're not going to get very far with that project, but they did it. And I learned from them that you have to start, you have to go out and do what you can do, and it's startling what they can accomplish. Let me give you an example of that. We had one student who went to South America, and I think it was a summer break, and he was looking for his honours thesis. And he came across a lot of street children, and it had been his intention to interview these street children, but he decided he was really appalled at their living conditions. These were children who'd either run away or been pushed out of their families, and who were living on the street, curled up on the pavement, begging for food, sometimes stealing. He decided he needed to start an orphanage. Now, you say, how can a mere undergraduate take on a problem of the street children in a South American city? But he did. He found a building and persuaded the owners that they should give it to him for the purpose of housing orphans. He went to the church and he found some nuns who were willing to look after the children. He came back to the United States and he started raising money for food for these orphans. So here was an undergraduate who really was changing lives. This orphanage housed, I've forgotten how many children, a handful, 10, 12, maybe more children, and he really had a major impact on their lives. We have many other stories of students who've really changed the lives of people who've done really important things that they wouldn't otherwise have done. And all of this was both with the blessing of human biology, but their energy, their idealism in turn inspired us to take on larger projects as well. Well, sometimes that's very humbling when you meet somebody in Safeway who says, I think I know you. And they say to me, were you at Stanford? I say I was on the faculty. And Humbio, they'll ask, I'll say yes. And they'll say, oh, I remember you. You did an interview with an anorexic female. Now, that's very humbling because I maybe gave them 26 lectures where I prepared for months and worked my hardest to be scholarly and thoughtful and stimulating. And what do they remember? The one lecture where I simply interviewed a young woman when we were doing a unit on eating disorders. So that's very humbling. Doesn't matter how hard you work, how much time you give them, you just become part of the blur of passing professors at Stanford. I've had, on a more positive vein, I've met students who years later have either written to me or met me at conferences and said, you changed my life. The course you taught me on adolescent development usually, or on methodology, has changed my life and I really wanted to tell you. So I had a student at Harvard saying, she was enrolled as a graduate student and she'd done her honours thesis under my direction and been in a methodology course. She said, I'm so far ahead of anybody else in the class and only now do I appreciate how much you taught me, and I'm writing to let you know that I'm appreciative. It has been for me really a growth experience and a wonderful career path to be in human biology. As I said, I entered the program in its first year. I was the first academic member of, female member of human biology. I stayed with the program for 37 consecutive years. I've marvelled at its growth and I've been really privileged to be part of this absolutely stellar program.